Well, channeling goddess Nada, who is one of the karmic lords, by the way, for our planet in the solar system here. She has a lot of other titles, which I'm not always aware of all of that. But nevertheless, she wanted to speak here today. I've given, 4 talks now over at the Corona Center on it started off with masters talking about essential oils. And what are essential oils? Those are the oils extracted from plants. They're the immune system of plants that protect them against sickness and disease. And what it does for us is our body's part plant, part animal, part mineral. So that's why we need them. Our ancestors have been using this for more than 10,000 years to heal ourselves. But they talk about the anointing of the oils, just like frankincense and myrrh, and those are some of the essential oils that one can obtain. And it's also very beneficial for developing your third eye. If you put frankincense, they're saying to me, on your thymus? Thymus? Well, that's your crown chakra, is your pineal gland. But nevertheless, it's very helpful for that. Over the years, I've given a number of psychic development classes, and the graduates of those classes who teach classes of their own now is Sharon and Tina. So they picked up the torch and still carrying it on here. So moving along here, I'm waiting for Goddess Nada to step in to talk with us today. To talk about some of the oils that we already talked about. We had Goddess Cassiopeia starting off. I have little stacks of CDs. I didn't anticipate this kind of turnout today. We can remedy that later. And it came down to spirit doctors talking about it. So it's kind of interesting. It's like filling in for the classes that you didn't get yet, even though we're speaking today. Now I feel her presence here. We welcome the great Goddess Nada, and she says, "Greetings, one and all, and to each and every one of you." So she's looking at like your soul lights for all of you present here today. It's a little sparkling. She says it's much like the twilight nightscape of Paris, where she sees all these lights, minus the tower. She has a sense of humor here. But moving along, she talks about today, in our talk about our thought patterns, she says first is the introduction to some basic sciences. So when we talk about crystals in dilution, we often think about sugar, for example, when you put it in water and it turns to a liquid, or salt. And here our bloodstream has a lot of salts in it. She talks about the many other minerals that are also dilute in solution. So she says the process is the synergetic process of our physical body that's necessary. We need all these chemical balances. So if under the right circumstances, you can actually reprecipitate those into crystal form. Even though they're in solution, they still act as if they're in a solid form. And many of the physics that scientists apply to, and design engineers, just in the use of your cell phones, have quite a number of crystal elements in it. Intrinsic metals and so on, which are still part of the crystal mineral kingdom. So she says, and in all of this, that our thought patterns that we radiate down the spine, and it connects to every nerve in your body, and even ethereally, we have an ethereal body, a high and low astral body, mental, emotional body, and higher dimensional bodies. When you talk about the 4th, 5th, 6th, and other dimensions, we're kind of like a shell of a multidimensional consciousness, which is us. We're just perhaps cognizant, she says, on the 3rd dimension, here present, and quite aware of our own existence in the present, as well as the physical discomforts or pleasures. So she says in this that every thought we think that's transmitted to all the nerves of our body is also radiated out electrically because of the electromagnetic properties of our body. When we talk about the electrical energy that's generated by a section of cells under your heart to generate electric spark, more or less, to cause your heart to beat, or the involuntary muscles of your diaphragm so you can breathe, and all the other systems, the lymphatic and so on, that carry these fluids about your body, the crystalline forms, she says that the thought impression, which is just like modulation on a radio frequency beam, there you have a radio transmitter transmitting just a single frequency, and we put upon it what we call intelligence, or in your case as young people, you have musical materials and talk and other things on it, and now even digital components. So she says, nevertheless, that happens in our physical body and our aura that radiates out all the signals that we think about all the time in the form of infrared radio transmissions. And she says infrared really is the upper range of microwave. So we're radiating microwave as a natural product of the body on the third dimension, as well as in the ethereal and the low astral dimensions. She says, and even higher, because thought has immediately, it's transferred everywhere at once. So when you think, she says about the great central sun, where the greatest activities of God is in his angels, as is talked about by Saint Germain and Paramahansa Yogananda and other teachers, as well as Goddess Nada and the Karmic Lords, our thought reaches God instantaneously. So that's at warp speed, plus, or turbo warp speed. So she says that, and she's bringing up just a reference to Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings. When we think about the great central sun as being so big that you take all matter in all dimensions and put it all together, it would be only a tiny fraction of it. And as you have the greatest activity of God's angels in higher dimensions, because we're not thinking about a cauldron of boiling metals, but of energy, that's where they exist. And the thing is, when we think about that, all of us in this room, you've just created a wormhole the length of your spine to the great central sun. So now when you pray to God, think about yourself there, and you are there, and that your prayers have much more power rather than being in the small frame, the tiny minuscule of our physical existence in this dimension here on this planet Earth. So she says, going back to all the emissions of electrical energies that are given out with all of our nerve impulses and everything's radiated, especially our thoughts and emotions, are recorded. On that, it creates patterns in these crystals. And she references a lot of scientific data. Not that she's saying the specific scientists discovered this, is the photograph of ice crystals exposed to thought, and how they change radically from something discordant to something very harmonious, and perhaps even a spiritual aspect to it. While she's saying that the crystal elements in our physical form, the various mineral elements, do rearrange themselves absolutely into sort of a pseudo-structure within our bloodstream and also within our lymphatic system. She talks about the endocrine system as well. She says the lymphatic system is the biggest system we have, even though the scientists talk about the 5 or 6 quarts of blood in the human body. We have more fluid than that with our lymphatic system and also within the cellular mass. So she says, interestingly enough, that there's a copy of all of our thoughts and things inside every cell. So in theory, as the scientists would say in the present technologies, that if someone were to clone a person from one cell, that it would have all the memories and everything we presently have, and the emotions. So you can see that holds water, and sort of using the colloquial phrase there. So beloved Goddess Nada, in respect to all of us, she's seeing that we also are beings of light. As you began to, she talked about the lower infrared that our bodies give off, but she's saying that in higher dimensions, as you raise the frequencies of it, becomes the extension of all rays, which makes white light. If you break it down into the spectrum of red to purple violet, it's a repetitive of itself in higher harmonics as we go up in dimension. So she says in a higher order we are really beings of light. And she says there's some exercises, even what beloved Lord Saint Germain refers to in some of his books, that's been channeled for him, about the diet that we can project by visualizing around our food that we eat. For example, the liquids we drink is transmuting with the purple violet energies into light, and therefore in some aspect you are eating light. And when we talk about the food that our body needs, we also need spiritual food and light food, otherwise we become sickened in some part of our consciousness. So complete balance there. We do need to connect to the divine creator or God, or whatever that you name, you aspire to the great creator. It's the instant that you connect, just by intention, starts the energy flow into our body, and it's a recharge that's held in the ethereal body, in the was more referred to as the energy body as well, and into our physical body. It's stored in the fascial layer of your skin, where you have the lymphatic fluids. So the talks that you listen, she says, to the pre-recorded items, I think she's referring to these previous channelings on CDs, that just like a capacitor holds a temporary charge like a battery in a car, so does the inner and outer layer of your skin trap all that energy in various forms and frequencies that maintain separateness in your fascial layer. So what does that say? That if you have an etherealized energy of a certain vibration, you can have something lower or higher or of a different octave and still maintain its separateness from all the rest of it. So she's talking about the harmony of the crystals that are in solution form within our physical body, that's around and also inside our brain. Our entire being radiates with the octave chords of the various thoughts in our existence. She says in a different aspect, she's going to bring a side note in here, a little adjunct, about the organs of our body. Each one has its own rhythm, even though you can see the blood pumping to each one. And just like a balloon, if you have a regular supply, the balloon will expand and contract. It provides a rhythm. But the interesting thing, because of the different shapes of the organs, they have sort of a resonant point of their own. So when you put them all together in a perfectly balanced consciousness and a perfectly healthy body, you have quite a harmony, a little quartet going, more or less. And then when a person has sort of sickening thoughts or emotions, then it starts to attract to it what we call poisons or toxins into that particular organ and lowers its frequency, causes a discordant vibration throughout the system, and also is reflected in our nerves, so that eventually it shows up in the muscle tensions in our face. This is that person has a sour face today, where that second person has a very sweet and harmonious, healthy face today. So she says it's by intention of our consciousness, and also you have to be physically practical about your body, at least in the physical dimension you live is to control our thoughts and our emotions. And she said that's tough to do because there's so many trigger points today. To somebody said something, it triggers a thought or it triggers an emotion, and also triggers our ability to generate light in that aspect. So we're radiating light messages to the universe of what our status is at this moment, your physical status, your mental status, your emotional status, and it affects everything else. She says that there you have the farthest star is affected by the grain of sand on our beach, and maybe in a minute way, but in the bigger picture, it's part of a sort of a tiny little aspect of a bigger tapestry. So she says to bring harmony into our body and also to have harmonious crystal patterns within us. She talks about our neighbors, our integrated part of ourselves is plants. And there she says there's been quite a few studies of people playing music and talking to their plants. And she says, and even in psychic development classes, this happened here in this room, where the entity would come right out of the plant, and everybody sensed it, and they knew exactly what it looked like in their mind's eye, you see. So there's cognitive intelligence everywhere, even in crystals or in a mineral kingdom, and she says in the plant kingdom. So interestingly enough, in the bigger picture of all of it, there we are, souls without, our beings without substance, without shape. And they have the divine soul of God, of which we are a tiny little splinter of, manifest and dipped into physical matter that was provided by the nature divas to create it. So there we have the nature divas. They're really behind the atomic elements and the light they're created of. In a bigger picture, it's all by intentions. She says it's likened unto the OSI layer of communications and transmission in our present data environment. She's talking about our communication systems with computers. So we have layers of physical layer, and then you have the next layer up that controls that. And we have communications layers and so on. One thing building upon another. So she says, and with a nature diva, they actually provide the physical matter that come together and form planets, suns, and thereof those planets there we have life in its essence. It tributes very much, she says, to the three things she says is the most important is the hydrogen and oxygen and the other elements sort of form around it. So it says that they're octaves of the original matter. So she says that as the plan was supposed to go, there we are in physical form, and the physical form is really manifestations of connections to nature diva, who created the water element, the earth, fire, and so on, air. And she says that, and in this, when we raise the vibration of our body through our thoughts, which is our spiritual temple, the divine dwelling place supposed to be of God that we welcome into our heart and our being, the energy just of that starts to raise the molecular and the atomic energies of our own being to a higher dimension. So the more that you connect with God, it starts to make you phase out of the physical, dense physical third dimension into the fourth, and we start to go higher, even into the fifth and higher. Some higher octaves of that. When we do that on earth, likewise, it also happens in the heavens. So our higher selves are actually in a meditative mode. They don't duplicate or copy everything that we do, because you have independent levels of consciousness, just like you have independent actions and even thought actions in your brain, like the left and right brain. It's possible to have two thoughts at the same time and to be integrated as a whole as it's manifested in the physical form of some of action or expression. So the great beloved goddess Nora is talking about our balance in the universe, our balance point. Everybody needs to find their balance point. Some find it through yoga and our connection with nature. She also talks about the sounds of nature. Then we bring in the animal population, like birds and bees and other things that provide us normal noises that are in harmony, because they're sinusoidal waves. That is, it forms a perfect S shape. If you take a look at our math representation of it in physics, there we have a signal going positive, and when it goes back to the null point, it becomes negative to make it a duplicate in the opposite phase. So not that she's trying to overcomplicate things, but when we make things that are non-sinusoidal, as a lot of the noises that are artificially made today, we cause a disruption in our nerves, and it produces false, she says, shadows and echoes in our own sound system of our body. So she says some young people, so they sit in their vehicles and listen to extremely loud levels, like as high as 110 decibels, which is a great deal of power, and it's changing all the frequencies of your organs inside your body, and then it starts to cause mutation and manifestation in something you don't want, in affecting your health and even mental health. She says, and likewise, there are other entities in God's kingdom that have separated themselves by their negative energy. And these beings are very much attracted to things that are non-sinusoidal, that are sort of a cacophony or just an unblanched noise of unharmony. They are harmonious with. So when we listen to these things, we draw these entities upon us. So many of them are depressing. So now it causes manic depression among many who find themselves in concerts at extremely high levels being exposed to this. So she thinks that we're making a toxic environment around the earth presently, is what Goddess Nada is saying, as mankind, where there's some smaller faction. At one time it was greater. In the midst of war, say in the 17 and 1800s, she says in Europe, that was quite depressing for all these people dying for somebody's control of land. And the great masters were brought in to create classical music and great art to lift all of our vibrations up out of something that was terribly negative and going downhill. And there we went to some point of balance, and then it started over again downhill in a different way, with more war brought negative beings in that inspired some to create noise, which some might refer to as music. The disharmony is creating an off resonance on our planet. She says that we talk about there's a rotation of our axis through the center of the Earth in respect to the rest of the solar system, the way that the planet's supposed to be spinning, and here we're off axis greater than 23.5 degrees. It climbed another half degree not long ago, and she says it's because of the disharmony that we're putting into the natural frequencies of the Earth. She says in simple math, if you take a planet which ours is about 10,000 miles across, she says, and it spins about 30,000 miles an hour, it's very easy to figure out the frequency of this planet. Time versus distance. So in this, she was not going to do it presently, the mathematical calculation, but she says it's easy enough generated that we can find out the harmony, the harmonics of the Earth's frequency that are in our audible range, because it's in a sub-audible, below our hearing range frequency. And it is all sinusoidal. She says every time that somebody sets off a bomb or something on this planet, she's referring to nuclear bombs underground, it sets off a note of disharmony to the planet. So in this, it triggers more negative energies that attract negative beings. So in this, we're trying to be the turning point, all of us present here as children of light and as the chosen sons and daughters of the Great White Brotherhood. All of you assembled here and heard that clarion call, and just by our own thought patterns of raising this planet, even if it's only for 1 second long, we see this whole planet bathed in divine light and love and harmony and harmonious sounds. Then what happens is it brings that balance up, and if enough of us did it, she said, we would have less planetary tilt, as some refer to it, and it would be 23.5 degrees, now it's 23, now it's 22, and the planet starts to right itself. So she says it takes a collective effort, so it's fighting an uphill battle against the mass consciousness of man. She says every one of you actually affects, just by your emotions and your intentions, the mass consciousness of man. So we are the balancing point from keeping it going like the ship sinking. So we're kind of like the bilge pumps on a great ship. And the more of us that we do that collectively together in harmony as a team and as individuals, you'll find that it will correct the environmental issues that are present today and the thinking behind it. So to go back to the patterns, like the crystal patterns formed in your bloodstream and in your lymphatic systems of your body, the water in your body, the water in your cells, they're very responsive to thought. So we become a massive transmitter, and like attracts alike. So when you have a group like this, she says, together with a like thought, it becomes quite a number of batteries added together that makes a massive battery and a massive charge. So she says that's why the prayer is very effective, she says, in putting that intention out in the universe, because they're all radiating it out in infrared and microwave form. So we're radiating in other dimensions our intentions. And we are all creators, just like the great creator that created us. So in a sort of a smaller scale, that we want to tap into the great creator's power to make immediate changes in our present life. So she says to wrap this up rather than going on. She doesn't want to make this a hackney where everyone's ears begins to turn off having listened too long a dissertation. So she wants to brighten it up a little bit. She asks us all to take a deep breath. And we let it out. And she said, one more breath. She has a sense of humor. She says, what do you smell? She says, you smell each other. So in that break state there, she's going back to her original dissertation here about the patterns that we create is by intention. So when we are the masters of our universe, we deliberately create these patterns of harmony. She said there are some that when they meditate, they'll put a meditative type of music of harmony in the background, or a classical piece or something in a lower level. It helps greatly in being able to get that concentration, that focus, to find our balance point. She says you go to your happy place in your mind, but if you make that a spiritual happy place, it's so much more uplifting. When you bring in the great creator, she does make a reference to why Saint Germain calls God the I Am Presence, and the fact that Abraham said to the burning bush, what is your name? I am. And she cuts it off at that, because according to some masters, that it was added later, the second I am that I am. It goes back to Alpha and Omega, always was and always will be, but it changes the meaning of all of it. So many of the masters, she says, refers to God as the I Am Presence. And in that context, It's all by intention and by thought and by sound. You'll be surprised the energies that will come to you when you connect to the divine presence. It'll be very energizing. So we go to the source to get our divine pattern, and as we begin to absorb and breathe it in, she says you can do that literally. I'm breathing in God's intentions for me. I'm breathing in God's divine plan for me. I'm breathing in literally divine light, and it comes to stay in us permanently, not to leave. And that way we make our temple a very bright temple. It also begins to etherealize your physical body and causes your features to become more even and delicate. So she talks about also your intellect starts to go up, your ability to see the depth and ramifications of things, not only in your present lives and the present civilization you live in, but also the bigger picture of your connection with God. As it also opens up the various psychic channels, she says every organ that you have, especially your chakra centers, the energy centers, are antennas of their own on their specific color and frequency. So there we have an intuitive response. As we open up all of our centers, then you'd be surprised the intuitive response level that you get. Your way to tune into each other in the universe becomes to a very heightened, very sensitive point, and that's by intention. So she says, is a man judged by his intentions, and also is the affections of the heart. She's talking about love is also judged by our intentions. So may they always be noble and of the purest nature. Then we bring in a great energy of momentum that helps us go forward in our universe to create harmonious lives, prosperous and healthy lives. And as we bless and thank God, we should also bless and thank the nature diva who created at least the earth, water, air, and fire, if nothing else, so that we bring harmony within our physical body, reminding us again that we're part plant, part mineral, and part animal in some aspects. So she brings this to a close, and she says adieu to all of you, and then she opens up the door for Goddess Hypatia to come and talk about spiritual resonance. Then all of you will find this quite rewarding. She asked me to put this recording on hold so that we can have a break. So I have Goddess Hypatia here, and she asked Paula to hit the gong. Now she says this is the beginning of her gong show. So moving along here, she talks about spiritual connections within our own consciousness and our interconnection with each other. And so she says the high road to spirituality often has humbling aspects to it. The hard parts of life, and God compels us to take different measures that work for a while, and then you end up that stops working, you have to learn something more, and it's a kind of a forced progression toward a march toward our own ascension, she says. But in the way, when we reach some attainment and we look back, she says it's advisable always to be humble. She talks about the poison and the worm of spiritual pride, and how it can ruin relations with others along the way, as well with ourselves. So she says as we put our ego aside, the more you learn, the less you think you know. She says that's very apt even as ascended master, because we can never know everything. So we tap into the divine and cosmic consciousness all the time. And she says that largely what the ascended masters do, if you didn't know, is they scan the planet constantly. So every 24-hour period, they're looking for people that send up prayers. So they're there to help answer those prayers, and also those who send love to help spread it out, because the world is lacking for love. So she says going back in our spiritual connection with God is a resonance in us, since we're a splinter of God's soul and being. So as a resonant point with the same frequency, that there's a part of us that will always be tuned to God's energies. So the more we acknowledge it, the more those energies actually transform down from the higher frequencies into our physical form also. And it begins to etherealize our physical body. He says you don't know how important that is to breathe in and to bring into your consciousness, see that light entering into the top of your head and going to the core of your being and spreading out, is serializing every cell in your body. It's putting new spiritual memories and also awakening that path back to the great creator. She says, without our spiritual breath we feel suffocated, though we can be satiated in society with every want and need fulfilled financially or some other way, whether it be through hunger or clothing or just the lust for power. She says that when you tune up to the divine presence, that fulfillment is much greater than any intrinsic thing that we could try to drape upon our physical form and physical matter. She does bring to that final time, at least on earth, of people where dust to dust, where a person meets their demise and ascended to a higher plane of existence, often called the spirit plane or spirit world. Some people refer to as heaven or nirvana. But she says, in the bigger picture there, that's just a holding pen for something greater. So she says to all of you, by your intention, wouldn't you want to go to something higher than the spirit world, or what we call heaven, after you find that time where you need to depart from the physical life? She says, by intention now you can make your decision to go higher than that. Every one of you is capable and should, then, rather than stop along the way and stuck for centuries sometimes in that between lives. So as we do that, we'll find we have a greater sense of mastery and a greater accomplishment, a realization of it, and our connection of God being not necessarily a divine splinter, but a piece of God that resonates. So every energy and intention that God has goes through all of us because we're part of Him. So as we tune into that divine plan, it's our little part of it, of this great tapestry or the harmony of our chorus, then we'll find a greater sense of purpose in life and fulfillment for whatever we do and mundanely in life to support ourselves or relationships and things will truly be blessed by it. She says also that all of us are part of a bigger spiritual groups that have come here in different time periods to help suffering humanity, and also for our own advancement as well as to the fulfillment of mastering material matter. Not that we needed to do that, but she says, for including herself, had been once time a physical being, so a corporal being, she says. So Hypatia says, and departing here after this her short dissertation, that she wants us to connect to that divine note, just like Paula went and did the gong there. God has that calling bell calling us back, at least in intention, to connect for our regular energy transference to us. So to maintain our existence in a healthy way, we need regular contact with our Creator. And also, you find with each one of your families or relationships, you have to maintain it. We always want to maintain our relationship with God. He never forgets about us, or she, she brings in the balance of the divine aspect of God, the Divine Mother. So when we feel that we need divine mothering, God is there to mother and nurture us. When we feel we need divine fathering in that father energies, then God will come and give us the comfort and support of a father. So we have our father and mother that's always been there, even between lives and before we're ever born or came into material existence. So she gives her adieu to all of you and sends out loves and kisses, like she kisses her hands and sends it out to everyone, and puts a little sprinkle of like cherry blossoms on top of our heads. And some of you may feel that energetically, some tingling there, that she's giving us some attunements to our divine development. Patient. So I feel Goddess Kuan Yin stepping in here for just a short dissertation also, and to bring this to a final close for today in our teachings about ourselves and our connections with the crystalline aspects of our own being. She says and talks about divine harmonies, in that that's the very fabric of our creation, that we're created of harmonious notes, and once played into physical matter, it makes the manifestation of man. If you take a look, she says that the genes, for example, has a spiral shape to it, and it's just like a harp, more or less, that you have the chords that you can pluck between the various frame of the harp. There we have our genes that resonate to certain light frequencies within our being. And she says it's very interesting that we have cosmic light or cosmic rays. They actually go right through our body. But it does, those rays are very necessary, just like the food source of having divine connection, or the physical food we have to consume in order to maintain our physical presence on the earth. The earth, water, and fire elements, she says. So she says and talks more about the resonance of our own genes here. So she thinks it's kind of amusing that we have a phrase in the English language, at least, that resonates with me. So she says, so make your resonances by intention, that you have clarity of mind, and clarity of heart, and clarity of purpose. So oftentimes we have so many other complications that what we feel other people expect of us, that is kind of like overlays over top of our own life's plan of what we have to do. Some of it, she said, is necessary in order to support yourselves. Some of it's necessary to have law and order in a country, and some of it's necessary, she says, for our own development. But in the bigger picture of it, we can pick and choose, how much we let other external things influence us. So she sees us as just like a divine flock of birds spiraling up into the higher heavens there, each on our own mission and path, but as a group, collective, we have a single purpose. So she says that all of your purposes on earth presently, at least at this moment, as we think about it, we can generate our harmonious waves of thought and light that radiate from, as God is not a reference, the microwave from our bodies, and even in the upper dimensions, like the lower astral and high astral dimensions, ethereal dimensions, and so on. And some will talk to you perhaps about the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th dimensions and higher. There's no limit. The dimensions of consciousness are there, or their embodiments. It becomes less and less and less till it doesn't have a form, where you just have the cognizance of knowing of your own being. So she talks about the divine presence and the great cosmic consciousness. Where's our goal? Where's the carrot? Where are we headed to? And in our presence and joining that great continuum, she says, as some might refer to it, is a sense of divine bliss and purpose. So she says there you have the Reiki teacher or the practitioner on earth, or Qigong or other modalities there, calling these cosmic beings into existence for specific purposes, whether it be the healing of somebody's hearing or to heal a broken leg, the many things that we can do to heal somebody's finances. She says, how come all of you haven't called divine presence? Because it's not a sin to call a cosmic consciousness to come and heal your money consciousness, your prosperity consciousness. She says it's okay as long as you don't let it become the monster in your life, like somebody that gets into involving too much alcohol, for example, that we don't let it take over our life. It's just a tool. But that's one of the aspects, is healing a person's prosperity consciousness, their spiritual consciousness, their health consciousness, their sociability in connection with others. So she says that there's a place and part for all of us in the divine tapestry that God created, and when we are in where we're supposed to be, the harmony is so great you couldn't find greater bliss in just performing our true purpose, for example. And she does want to make a last note before she departs, in that she sees that there are many young people here today, and there's like many questions about relationships and connections with others and their purposes. So she says, for yourself, we also pray for our divine purpose, relieve us of the lessons we've already learned, so we don't have to relearn them in life, so you don't have you can circumvent them on the path of your life. And she likes another resonance here is to pray for what you didn't know what to ask for, that God sure does, and it will bring greater harmony into your life. And as far as putting our faith and trust that we're going to find that right person, so we take our ego out of it, what we think, and ask for divine guidance in this, and even for the other person whom you've yet to meet, perhaps, then you'll find your relationships will be much more harmonious and blissful, where you have two people on the same page working together rather than working separately and against each other. And she says lastly that true love, she says, is 4 inches above your solar plexus. So when you feel it in your heart rather than in your solar plexus is what you should have for genuine and true love. So God loves us that way, infinitely. And no matter what we do, if we trip and fall in life, whether morally or whatever, He gives us an infinite number of chances to pick up, to brush off our knees, give us the courage to move on, and even a little shove toward the right direction. So He says, and if you don't know what to say, even in a prayer, you say, "Thy words and not mine," and then the words will come, because it will allow God's angels, because God does delegate responsibilities to others, to come perhaps and say things through you for your highest good. So if you didn't know what to pray for your highest good, and your guardian angels weren't inclined to tell you, perhaps by some rules that they're governed by, then you can ask for one of them, "Thy words, not mine," to pray through me what I will need and didn't know to ask for. So she sort of gave you a coverall for everything, like one thing takes care of everything, easy button. So she says again, she will leave with the gong. So once again, she's asking Paula to hit the gong to end our session.